Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenMara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight is the 5th Monday in the month of April, so it is Dealer's Choice night, and I decided that I would go ahead and do the follow-up to the myth and tarot we did last week, which was on Echidna, the mother of monsters, with her spouse. We are going to look at Echidna's husband or partner, however you want to look at that, and that is Typhon. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button, drop a like on the video. If you hop into the live video, go ahead and chat away. You can ask questions, I'll get to those at the end. And if you're watching this on replay, go ahead and comment. I do check all of my comments. So, where are we at here? As with Echidna, there are many myths and legends about this particular entity. And I have some theories about that. We'll get to those before we get to the tarot reading at the end. But let's just say that I'm going to go through the most commonly associated aspect of Typhon, because there's a couple of different versions of his story out there, and this is the most basic one. Hello. So that's what we're gonna shoot for. Is just gonna go through the basics. Something I normally don't do. This one gets a little intense, and I'm going to keep it PG, but it does get a little graphic at points. Nothing too bad. Like I said, it's PG, so that's what we're shooting for. Where was I? It is said that Typhon was the son of Tartarus and the goddess Gaia. Later, it was said that he was the son of Hera. To me, it's a more fitting family tree having him be the son of Kronos, which was another aspect of who his father could be, who was a titan and the father of time in some legends. The commonly accepted story is that Typhon was born of Gaia in retaliation against the Olympians, Zeus and his cronies. The reason? The Olympians had killed Gaia's children, the giants, and Mad Mama makes big monster. And that's pretty much how Typhon shows up. Another source of Typhon is that Hera herself wanted him to be born. She prayed to Gaia, Uranus, and Tartarus for an avenger against her philandering hubby Zeus. And considering that malfunctioned relationship, not that surprising. They made her pregnant, the three of them, and this child was born Typhon. Hera was never the best judge of, well, really anything if we're looking at honesty here. She was just very spiteful. So she gave Typhon to another being named Python. And this led to Typhon and Python being basically the bane to anything godlike or mere mortals, like very, very hostile creature. A bit more weird, gross way that Typhon came into existence was Gaia and Hera were having girl talk, and Gaia was just kind of saying how bad Zeus really was, which he had his moments, and she was expressing her anger to Hera about Zeus's everything. And Hera, being Hera, and I will go over her, she is an interesting Olympian goddess, very angry at life in general, but we'll go over her in a future episode. She decided that she was going to go to her father, who tried to kill her years ago, Kronos, and sought revenge against Zeus. Well, Kronos was trapped in Tartarus at the time, and so he was like, sure thing. So it was said that Kronos took 2 eggs, smeared his personal seed all over the eggs, and then handed these gooey eggs back to Hera, with instructions to plant said seeded eggs into the earth when she returned from Tartarus. And she would follow through with these instructions, and Typhon would spring forth from the earth shortly thereafter. The Greeks have the greatest myths on the planet. They're either disgusting or they're amazing, and this one has a little bit of both. So, the place of Typhon's birth and his growing up are in the area of Sicilia. I always say this wrong. Cilicia, and as I mentioned before, the residence, he also resided in the Corinthian caves with Echidna. So this is just a little background of where he comes from, kind of how he shows up. Unlike Echidna, his spouse, who is timeless, her origin is a little different than Typhon's by a long shot. She is said to be one of the Titans, or one of the gods older than the Titans and older than Gaia herself, whereas Typhon kind of shows up later, but we'll get into that. So what does this father of monsters look like? Kind of know where he came from. This is getting into some Eldritch Lovecraftian horror. The description of this creature is so amazing. Here's one artist's rendering. Very simple, very basic, but notice he's standing on Earth, but he's in the sky where his head is. It was the largest of Gaia's children. None of them were ever close to the size of Typhon. And the name sounds vaguely familiar. They named a storm after him. That's where we get the concept of a typhoon, is from this guy here. So, Typhon was a horrible creature. The older descriptions of him were way better. This depiction here is actually of one of the later stories about him. It doesn't do justice to the original description, which is what I'm going to go over here. And that's why I'm going over the original, because it's more intense. He was lawless and without morals, a horrible creature to behold and to ever have existed. Power beyond the mind of mortal man, it was said. Upon his shoulders, where his head was supposed to be, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of snakes. Picture Medusa on steroids. Power in his hands and feet without loss or of fear of being tired ever. Basically, he was a berserker. Like, there was no stopping this if it ever got going. The snakes had dark flicking tongues and eyes that flashed the color of fire on each of the heads. Getting into that nightmare thing again. His voice was the sound of nightmares from beyond Hades. The voices uttered sounds of chaos, nightmares, screams, usually fighting with each other. I'm not really sure how that worked, but that was the description. Bellows of an angry bull were common to hear from many of the heads. At times the noises were of pups, like puppies, and very happy, but it would transfer into the hissing of snakes and the yelling of lions. Basically, he was just a total chaos deity, is what they portray him as, but they rarely call him a god, even though that was the level of his authority and power. Authors describe Typhon as a cruel and evil creature. Nothing of gods or men existed in this being. Horrifying, I mean, what do you expect? Another description to add to the, beauty of Typhon is from the waist up, he was the body of a man with dragon-like wings. The waist down was two long, very active snake tails instead of legs. Still with the snake head thing going on. And this description, it was also written that his head brushed the stars. That's a massively humongous being. Eater of Worlds would be a name that you could use. Going kind of makes you suspicious of where H.P. Lovecraft got Cthulhu because the description is very similar here. Typhon in these myths would be much more massive than his mother Gaia, who was the queen of the Titans, or his kinda stepmother thing Hera, who was slightly larger than humans. I believe the original stories of the Olympians where they stood 12 to 15 feet tall. Still big, but Typhon was beyond that. The author Nonus liked snakes, apparently, because he would go on to describe Typhon as being made of snakes of all sorts, not just on his head and his legs. He had snakes for arms, snakes issuing from his hands, and venom poured from the thousands of serpent mouths that writhed around the core body of Typhon. And it was from Nonus that the other heads or faces eventually became added on. And it was said in his story of Typhon that each snake had at the head a different beast that existed. Lions, bulls, bears, hawks, eagles. Basically, if the Greeks knew about it, one of these snake heads had that as its head. And it was in a constant state of noise, calling, screaming, and carrying on. Total chaos, total noisemaker. The more I read about Typhon and some of the stories, the worse it got. Like I said, I'm condensing this into a shorter version because there's a lot there. And kind of going along the description of what Nonus just described, this is an image that I found similar to, you got your dragon wings, you got your gazillion snakes. This one's more of like a dragon base. Again, we're kind of looking at like a Hydra type creature with all the heads, but this is kind of where we're going when we think of Typhon. Basically, it's an unstoppable monster. The older lore has Typhon falling in love, and those were the words, and I looked in multiple sources. They all have the same phrasing. Typhon fell in love. Typhon adored. Typhon became romantically attached to Echidna. When you read about Typhon, you hear about him, destroyer of worlds, destroyer of the gods, hated humans, hated mankind. How did it feel love? That kind of is one of those questions I asked myself as I was researching this. But something about Echidna, who was not pleasant in her own right, caught his eye, and they would eventually join together. In some sources it says marriage, others just say they joined in bliss. Again, their version of bliss I don't think I want to be interested in. Copulation over time would lead to the birth of a new line of horrors. Father of monsters, mother of monsters. We have Orthrus, the two-headed dog that guarded Gerion's cattle. We have Cerberus, guarding the gates of Tartarus and Hades. The Lernaean Hydra, who Hercules slew. We also have the Chimera and the Caucasian Eagle. The Caucasian Eagle is the massive eagle that would devour Prometheus's liver for, being nice to us humans. Zeus wasn't happy about that, so poor Prometheus had to pay for that. Later authors would also add the Ladon dragon that guards the golden apple tree and the garden of Hesperides. I bet the family pictures were amazing with this particular clan of nightmares. The cameras probably exploded, and if it was a painting, the artists probably removed their eyes afterwards. Not a pretty picture with family-wise. Even with that, Echidna was a very devoted mother. She very strongly took care of her children, even with Typhon off doing his thing and hating everybody but her and his kids. And there were others later on, my mouse just jumped, that could be added, and other myths tried to tie them in. As I said with Echidna, they tried to add in the Sphinx. Sphinx is way older than Greece. Like, it goes back beyond Egypt. That's a very ancient being that I will try to talk about later. That's going to be a long discussion, though, because the Sphinx has an exceptionally big history. But we also have things like the Gorgons, Medusa's family line. The Colchian dragon and the Harpies are also some of the other beings attributed to the pairing of Echidna and Typhon. Basically, everything that the Greeks were scared of, horrified of, told stories to their children to chase them back inside at night, came from Typhon and Echidna. Was Typhon always a horror to gods and men? Short answer, yes. There was no redeeming factors outside of Echidna. She had some redeeming factors. She didn't really hate humanity, she just didn't like the Olympians. She thought they were toxic creatures that should be wiped from the planet. But she was a mother who was ticked off that her kids were being killed, so justified in her experience. Typhon was just ecstatic to have a reason to challenge Zeus and the Olympians. As Hercules took out Echidna's children, her rage grew. This fed into Typhon's plan. Typhon wanted to rule the cosmos. At least our planet, his own mother Gaia, he didn't even care. He wanted full domination. And at his grandest, he wanted the known galaxy at that time. The Greeks would look at it as our solar system, but that's what Typhon wanted to control. He had some big ambitions. The two parent monsters decided that they were done with the Olympians taking out Echidna's children, and they made a move on Olympus. And as they moved towards Olympus, the very ground shook with fear at their rage. The skies flashed with fury. The winds whipped up tornadoes, typhoons. Most of the gods fled the Olympian mountain. They were done. They were out. It's all on you, Zeus. You want to have this? This is your battle. We're peacing out. And it's said a lot of them ended up in Egypt. But again, we're having that weird crossover in timelines, so pick and choose as you go here. Zeus did stay behind. Some say he had other help. Some say Athena stayed with him. There was a reference to Hephaestus at one point, but Zeus is the primary character that stays back. The Titans, it was also referenced, trapped in Tartarus, guarded by Hades and Cerberus and the rest of the crowd. They heard the battle on Earth. That's how loud this thing was. They were a bit shocked by the force of nature being exerted up on the surface of the planet at the time. Back on, our human plane, the seas raged. The waves smashed into the shore, taking off chunks of land. The earth heaved to and fro as Typhon launched his attack against the Olympian mountain. Zeus struck back with the power and fury of lightning smashing into the monstrous form of Typhon, scorching the ground around him as the power seared his flesh. Basically, for about, depending on the source, the original story said at less than a week, these two went at it and pretty much wiped everything out in Europe. Other stories say this went on for months. Those stories are not as flashy, so I went with the fun one. Those were also later, and there was some very interesting Christian overtones tied into later stories that I'm not really sure how I feel about that, because leave the myths alone. But the battle for this time raged on, and finally Zeus was able to blast the serpent heads off of Typhon's shoulders. The wounds were cauterized by the heat, and if you watched the Hydra episode, that's where that kind of ties in. And finally, Typhon, in great agony, fell to the land, spent and blind. All of his eyeballs were burned off. But he was not dead. He is, after all, an immortal. And the earth, or Gaia, groaned as his ichor flowed out onto the land. Binding him in his slumber, it is said Zeus cast Mount Etna on top of him. Some say he was actually buried in Tartarus as well. Others say he was bound between Tartarus and our world under Mount Etna, so he's kind of in a limbo state. Either way, he was shoved under earth, put to bed for eternity, basically. There are some other stories that say he fled before Zeus's fury. These ones are the ones that get into some interesting, not as exciting storylines. One in this vein, he tried to hide on the islands, and it sounds like the earth itself, Gaia, was absolutely not having it. You're not hiding here. And so everywhere he would go, mountains would erupt in volcanoes, exposing where he was hiding. In these stories, Typhon would end up being trapped under an island in the Mediterranean Sea. There were a later detailed story that I'll just kind of go over. This is the one that really leads into, not so much with Typhon, but shortly after, very Christianized theming. And it was the story that Nonus wrote, and I linked a description down below of from archive and from a book that you can pick up if you're interested. But basically, this version makes Typhon sound like a petulant child. Still huge, just kind of immature. He starts throwing stones, i.e. boulders, because he's gigantic, at Mount Olympus. The other gods sense trouble, and they just flee to Egypt. That part stays the same. Zeus attacks Typhon. Typhon injures Zeus and packs him off to his lair. The nature spirits, mainly the fauns and the satyrs, come to Zeus's aid. Zeus escapes and pursues Typhon. Typhon's trying to learn how to wield the skies and the rains, as well as the earth. He figures out where Zeus gets his lightning bolts, tries to use them, shocks himself. They chase each other around mostly Europe. The story has some very interesting landmarks all over the continent. Until eventually someone tricks Typhon into eating a food that drains his energy. Zeus attacks, injures, and buries Typhon. It's written in a lyrical poem, and the poem itself is actually really well done. It's just not that exciting. And this version takes the teeth out of Typhon because he goes from being, in the older stories, this monstrous creature that just, you're not stopping this, to he's kind of a little kid throwing stones at an adult. That's what it kind of gets played down to. It also casts the Olympians as very weak. The Olympians were interesting beings altogether. Weak is not one that I would ever describe them as, but in this particular poem, they do weaken them. But Nonus, when he first started writing this, because it's like an 800 and some odd verse poem, it's humongous. When he first started writing it, he had not converted to Christianity. By the end, he had, and it is suspected that he went back through to basically tone down the paranormal parts of the story because of his new found belief system. That's fine, but again, not as cool as the older stories where it was all lightning, thunder, and destruction. So that's the basics of Typhon. The myths are similar in other countries, and this is the part that I found fascinating. These stories actually go back millennia. Typhon can be seen as the darkest aspects of the universe, the destructive chaos that exists and has to be controlled and tamed, but it's more like putting a leash on it. You're never actually going to tame it, you're just hoping it doesn't turn on you. And why I say that is Mesopotamia has their version of this story with Marduk as Zeus, savior type energy, and Tiamat. Marduk was a storm god, lightning, thunder, etc., and he was the savior of his people. Tiamat was a massive serpent-like goddess who is referenced as the sea personified, hating God and man alike. And I do want to go over Tiamat because she's a fascinating one as well, just because the way she died, she didn't really die. She just was changed, kind of like Typhon. Going back even further than Mesopotamia, we go to Sumeria. And there are Sumerian poems that talk about King Ninurta and the monstrous Asag or Ansu. The Sumerian kings, if you look at the kings list and you kind of look through some of the time frames there, the kings lived for thousands of years. I think the shortest king's rulership was 15,000 years. The longest one was 27.5 or something like that. Massive time periods that they reference. It was also believed by this that they were beings from the stars and had amazing technology or exceptional powers. So to humanity, whose lifespans even at that time was only 150 to 200 years, you're looking at these beings as godlike. So to have Ninurta and one of these other monsters going at each other would attribute to that concept of total chaos needing to be brought to order. There's also a legend that has Typhon associated with or used instead of the Egyptian god of destruction, war, and chaos named Set. Horus, again, was the hero, the savior of that tale, and there are certain ceremonial magic traditions today that have integrated Typhon in some of the Egyptian phrasing of some of their rituals. So Typhon's association with Egypt wasn't just at that time, it's been brought forward, and a lot of the Typhon stuff you'll see in metaphysical ritual work is going to be tied a lot more to Egypt because of Aleister Crowley, I believe, and the Golden Dawn in their work, less so than to Greece. He's started in Greece, though. We'll give him that. And it's interesting to look at these stories because Echidna, his wife, was beyond time. No one knows where she came from. She just showed up in Greece. Typhon was created to destroy time and life itself. Gaia was ticked when she created Typhon. Echidna and Typhon, they fell in love, and that is such a weird thing to say about creatures like this. Echidna was never referenced as a deity. Even though she had that authority and she had the power to be one, she was never referenced as one. Their offspring was horrific. And the Olympians were terrified of the offspring and of these two, because Typhon was an unstoppable force, Echidna was ancient. They were so terrified that they conspired to destroy the offspring using Hercules, as I mentioned before. This is what started the downfall of Typhon, and his ego got in the way, and it made it even worse. And all of this ended up in Typhon being trapped in Earth, and Echidna put herself into a deep slumber just because she couldn't deal with the trauma of what had happened. And a fair amount of the Olympians had been chased from their homes during this war. A couple of them later on would come back, around 12 or so would return to Olympus, but for the most part they were done. And this was kind of the ending of a lot of the stories and myths with Olympia in the older stories. The newer stories kind of say that this was the victory lap that Zeus needed to secure his position for the Greeks as the god for all times, but that was kind of how things wrapped up for him. It wasn't great by any stretch. Typhon is basically primal chaos. So if you imagine this thing that has no mind, this gibbering, blithering idiot, basically, that was Typhon. He had one purpose, and that was destruction. He hated the ancient Olympian gods because he was created for that purpose from Gaia, and he wanted absolute destruction of humanity. But there's never been a reason other than the Olympians did like, us little meat suits down here, but So maybe by that association we got lumped into the mess as well, but not the most pleasant creature. So, with the Myth and Tarot series, we do our little tarot reading for our mythological creature, and so tonight, too many things going on here. We'll go ahead and use my Tarot Art Nouveau deck, and we'll do a Celtic cross spread for Typhon and see what the cards have to say. Yeah, I mean, he's an immortal, might be still laying down under Mount Etna somewhere. So let's see what the cards have to say about him. Because Echidna, she's still dreaming. She's kind of rumbling and grumbling. If you watch the last episode, she's starting to wake up a little bit from what the cards were saying. So that could be interesting in the next couple thousand years. But let's see what Typhon has going on with him. Because Zeus did a lot of damage to him, and the ancient stories did say that he was completely blinded. All of his bazillion heads had been severed, blinded, or somehow damaged. So he's not really going anywhere. And even if he did escape, he can't see anything, he can't hear anything. It would just be fumbling around, which personally I don't want that fumbling around, but that's where we're at. So our first card, this is where he is personally, is the Four of Pentacles. Feeling some doubt, feeling some lack of trust going on here, and there's also a little bit of naivety, and it could be on the Greeks and the Olympians being, oh no, it's fine, he's not going to come back, but there's definitely some naive innocence going on there, and that could be just the innocence of the chaos for him, because that is his card. He's the center of everything here, and it's really saying there's a lack of trust, but if you kind of look closer, there's almost something devious going on. Like, yeah, the upper lady, she's trying to be nice, but you almost get that feeling that there's something sinister there. So he might be playing nice because he's asleep, and he's injured. But is he going to stay there? That's the important question. The thing that's crossing him is the Three of Pentacles. His loneliness is driven him mad, is kind of what I'm getting here. So his intelligence wasn't that great to start with, but at this point, what little he did have is gone. So that naiveness could be part of that as well, but what's crossing him is loneliness, isolation. He wants to try to wake back up. None of us want that. Stay over there and asleep. But he still has the ability to influence the weather, and that's one of his extended abilities, is he does still have that connection to Gaia, his mother, our planet, and so there is still some of that chaos going on. And if you look at what's going on as far as hurricanes, weird tornadoes, and earthquakes, there could be something to him waking up. Just saying. His upper influences, his higher self, if he has one, is the Five of Pentacles. There's a lot of, I have to censor this card, there's a lot of doubt, a lot of frustration. So his higher self is actually not happy with the situation. Like, dude, quit going after everybody. You don't have to be at war all the time. His higher self is actually trying to show him that there's a conscience available if he wants it. Not Typhon's thing. He's pretty much like, I don't want to listen to you, you be quiet up there. But that's, the higher self energy is really wanting him to settle down, quit being warlock. You might learn something if you're not out trying to destroy everybody. His shadow self, his root, so to speak, is the King of Wands. He's been there, he's done that. His ego will not let him not continue the battle. The Wands is the signifier of fire, it is passion, it is creativity. It's also, in its toxic form, warlike. It is chaos. This is the planet of Mars. This is that energy of destruction. So his shadow is still holding dominion in his life. His higher self is the still small voice we've heard growing up. I don't even know if you can hear it anymore for that poor boy, because the King of Wands is squawking really loud about destruction. His immediate past and we're, he's an immortal, so we'll go 2,000 years here, is 17, the stars. He aimed for the stars and missed. Literally. And so his history is not the greatest. The last 2,000 years, he knows what he could have achieved, and he's been dreaming about it. He can't see it, but he's been dreaming about it, and it's a little bit of a loss, but it also means that his eternity is stretching out in front of him, and he has no way of knowing how far that's going to go. But his history, at this point, he had shot for the stars and he missed, and it nailed him pretty hard. His immediate future is the Five of Wands, back to that fire energy, and it's a lonely future. He's looking forward, he's trying to understand how did this happen, how can I move forward. Not the greatest future available to him. He's not having fun, he's kind of lonely, he's kind of miserable at this point, but that's where he's at. His current attitude, this is how he's feeling in here, not so much the other influences, this is him. It's the Two of Pentacles. He doesn't feel like he did anything wrong. He doesn't understand why everyone hates him. He can't figure this out. He knows he has the ability to move forward. He knows that he was the victim. He's trying to play that victim card. But it's not really accurate, because he did a lot of destruction on his own, but he sees it as, I was just retaliating because they were coming after me. Not quite. The environment that he's currently in, this is going to be an interesting card, is kind of a chaotic mess. We have the King of Swords, so you've got this cutting way of illusions. So his environment was actually set up to help him understand where he is, who he is. It was set up to peel away the fact that, no, you kind of did this yourself, buddy. How are you going to fix it? How are you going to improve from it? Are you going to listen to your conscience, or are you going to continue to listen to your shadow? And that's where his environment is. That's where he's trapped. I mean, he's trapped somewhere in limbo, basically. His hopes and fears is the One of Chalices. This is the beginning of some form of emotional healing. This could be something that he's trying to grow towards, or that his higher self is pushing him towards. Basically, look at how Echidna existed. She didn't really hate humans, she didn't hate the gods until they start going after her kids, and then she was furious. And this could be just what her influence too, because she's sleeping not very far from him. Hers is out of grief, his is out of punishment, but they could be dreaming together, and she could be influencing his emotions to start feeling a little bit better. But the overall outcome is the Five of Chalices. He cannot get over the fact that he was defeated. He has the option to turn around and actually move on, but he is so stuck on this broken vase, this loss of his stars, that he doesn't know how to move forward any longer. He's literally stuck in time. So, not the greatest outcome for little Typhon, little huge Typhon, but it's definitely kind of what he needs. He needs to be where he's at. He needs to have that timeout period to learn the error of his ways, although being trapped in silence, in darkness for eternity, probably is not going to teach him the error of his ways. Just saying. So with that, we'll wrap this episode up. If you enjoyed that, please drop a like on it. If you're watching on replay, comment and let me know what your thoughts are. Next week, we'll be back to occult and crochet. Don't have a person top picked out just yet, but that's next Monday. And it's the first of the month, so keep your eyes out for my upcoming drops of the May elemental intuitive readings. They're going to be dropping this week sometime. With that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and I will see you in the next episode.